Welcome back to the Roadsiderescue YouTube channel. I'm Ernest.
And I'm Cameron from Self-Help Therapy.
Yeah, so Cameron goes to school out here with me. We both go to BYU. And I was fixing Cameron's car one day, and we were talking about, he's my buddy, we were talking about, because he does psychology stuff, and you're actually in a graduate program, yeah.
Finishing up my PhD.
Yeah, finishing up his PhD, so he knows his psychology stuff. And we were talking about how mechanics and like car salesmen and stuff will use psychological tactics to kind of like trap you, and I was like, man, we should do a video about that. So this isn't a roadside rescue video. We're not fixing a car in this episode. The next episode after this will be, but occasionally we do these videos where we kind of talk about, and I say we, historically I've always done these videos where I talk about, how's somebody going to try and rip you off? What should you, bring, tools should you bring with you on a road trip or whatever, just informative videos. So this is another one of those videos, and Cameron's here to give us the psychological lowdown on how you can avoid getting ripped off and stuff. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Mechanics will often try and rip people off. It's well known, and I never do that to people because I have an honor code of my own, but a lot of mechanics are shady, and this is what they'll do. These are the kind of tricks they're going to play on you, and how to avoid those. So we'll jump right into it.
Yeah, perfect. And I think this is going to be really helpful for people like me where, I know absolutely nothing about cars, but I can spot the red flags of people trying to persuade me to do things that maybe aren't in my best interest or things that I don't really need. So getting your perspective on the cars and then my perspective on the psychology, I think it'll be a great.
Yeah, because I'm the opposite. I'm a sucker. If somebody tells me I need something, I'm more likely to not spot those red flags. But at least when it comes to cars, I know, hey, that doesn't sound right. But yeah, Cameron's YouTube channel, he talks about stuff like this, all sorts of different aspects of psychology. So the link to his channel will be at the top of the description. I'll tag him in the title of the video as well. So feel free to check out his channel if you're interested in that kind of stuff. And yeah, let's jump right into it.
Okay. So the first thing is this idea called reciprocity. And psychology tells us that when someone gives us something, we feel this obligation to give them something in return. So this is something that salesmen use all the time. And you're going to see this especially with mechanic shops and quick oil change places. What's the proper word for that?
Yeah, just a quick lube shop.
Okay, quick lube shop. Yeah, exactly. And they're going to give you these, free detailed diagnostic tests or a discount that they send you in the mail to get your oil changed.
Or popcorn in the waiting room.
Even popcorn in the waiting room is exactly their tactic, to try to give you something so that you feel that you have to give something in return. And so when you kind of see all these things starting to happen during your service, those can be, at least for me, those are ideas for me to know that okay, I'm going to probably feel psychologically like I need to give them something in return, which may be them changing out my air filter or them, doing a service on my car that maybe it doesn't actually need at the time, but I'm going to feel obligated to do just because of those things that they've already offered me.
Yeah.
So,
well, to cut in, maybe you do need it as well, but they may not be the best place to do it for you. They may be charging you a lot, so it's not to say that, hey, they're ripping you off and telling you. Sometimes they will tell you that you need to have something done that you don't, but maybe you do need an air filter change. I've seen them show people air filters, and they've done it to me when I worked for somebody else in a fleet vehicle. I had to take it in to get an oil change. They showed me an air filter that didn't fit the vehicle I was driving, so it was just a random air filter. But again, maybe you do need an air filter, but don't feel obligated to get it done at that place anyways. You can go buy one yourself and install it, or have someone else do it.
Exactly. I think that's really getting at it, where we feel oh, we're there, they've already done all this stuff for us, yeah, I'll let them do it, even though they could be overcharging or it's not even necessary in the first place. So I think taking a minute in that situation to be okay, well, the car got me here, it can probably get me home or somewhere else where I can really kind of do my research to see if A, I need that, and B, if this is the best place to do it.
Yeah, I'd say just do your research. If you have to say, hey, give me a few minutes and call another shop or your buddy or somebody else just to see, hey, is $20 for an air filter a good price? If you buy an air filter at AutoZone, it's cost you $15.99. Maybe just pay them the $4 extra. So I'm not saying don't do it there, but just kind of it's one of those flags to be okay, proceed with caution. Just think about it.
Exactly. And there have been plenty of instances where I've been sitting in the auto shop and I've texted Ernest to be hey, do I really need, they're telling me I need this, do I really need this? And it'll be probably not, but I'll take a look at it. So if you have a mechanic friend, that's even better. So.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing to keep in mind is this idea of scarcity. And this is something that, again, salesmen use all the time, but you might hear it even when somebody's working on your car, where they might say something like, hey, I found this problem with your car, I have one more of that part in stock, I can switch it out real quick for you. For some reason, I mean, psychology tells us that when something is perceived to be limited to us, we want that thing more. And this happened to me just a few months ago when I was getting my tires changed. The guy changing my tires told me, like, hey, you know, yeah, these tires are really bad. You need to change them. I have 2 more in stock. The rest aren't going to come for a while, so I can throw these on real quick for you. And just hearing that he only had 2 left made me want to buy them that much more right there in the moment, even though I probably should have shopped around a little bit more and seen if I could have got a better deal or what was up with that.
Yeah, totally. I've also seen in my personal experience with customers that they'll go to like the dealership or a shop or wherever, and they'll say, hey, your car has this common problem. You know, maybe it's the belt or the tensioner brakes. You know, yours hasn't broken yet, but it's probably going to break soon. And because everybody's is breaking, you can't find these parts. But we just so happen to have one that fits your vehicle. We should throw it on for you for $450, whatever. They'll overcharge you. You know, a lot of shops are a lot more expensive than they should be. But, you know, again, one of those red flags, think, okay, maybe I should look online and see if I can order a part myself or get one at AutoZone that has a good warranty or whatever. So, you know, don't jump headfirst into it.
Right, yeah. Exactly right. If there's that scarcity mentality going on, or you feel like, oh no, it's limited, I got to jump on this right now, that's probably a red flag.
Yeah.
Another one too, and this one I think is applicable to so many other scenarios, even outside of mechanics, but it's when we perceive the person talking to us to be an authority figure. And so, you know, with Ernest, you know, dressed up in his jumpsuit and everything, like
Pull up in the big truck.
Exactly. I see him as the authority figure on my car, and so it's hard for me because I'm going to be like, okay, yeah, whatever you say, like, you're the doctor wearing the lab coat, like, you know way better than I do, and we can fall victim to that. And then it's hard because mechanics can kind of play on that too, where they know that they are perceived as the authority figure, which psychology tells us, you know, we're a lot more obedient when we perceive the other person to be in authority. So just kind of, and I don't know if that's just going to be wherever you go. So just kind of being aware of that and knowing that that's going to be almost working against you sometimes is important to keep in mind.
Yeah, there's this and there's one other that are the most common ways that a mechanic's going to rip you off, in my opinion. Authority's the biggest one. And it's not like a mechanic went to school, you know, studied psychology and learned that. He just learned it from experience. But it's the same kind of thing, you know, if a doctor tells you, hey, you're sick, you need to do this, you know, who are you to say, oh, no, it's not. So what I recommend is going to a mechanic that you really trust, because here's what happens. You go to a mechanic and he gives you a printout sheet, you know, you pay him for the $100 diagnosis, or he gives you a free inspection on your vehicle, and he says, okay, look, you got to pay me $2,000 because, you know, this might break, this is bad. What happens is if you take that sheet to another mechanic, if you don't trust that mechanic and they don't know you, I found that most of the time that mechanic's just going to give you a better quote and do all the exact same things, and half of them you don't need. So really you need to go to a trusted mechanic where he can say, somebody that you can trust will look at the sheet and say, you know what, it looks like they're pulling a fast one on you. You don't need new ball joints. You don't need new brake pads. If that makes sense. So, you know, you get a sheet from somebody who's crooked, you know, somebody who's, you know, acting like the authority figure and trying to rip you off. You take it to somebody else. If you don't trust them, they may try and do the same thing. But so take it to somebody that you trust, and you know, they can say half these things you do need, half these things you don't, all of them you do. But somebody that when they give you the final word, you say, okay, you know, let me save up, or let me go ahead and invest and do that. So, you know, that's a good one. That's the biggest one I've seen people get ripped off with.
And it's funny you mentioned that because I brought my printout from the last time I got my oil changed, and the total, $2,470.83. But
Yeah.
I'm just wondering,
Stop making it up.
if you look over this, I'm just wondering, like, if anything jumps out to you is like, oh, that's like, why would you?
Yeah, so let's look at it here, because I think you sent me a picture of this, but it's been a while. And did you send me a picture of it?
I think I just asked you.
You
Like,
just asked me.
do I need my brake?
Yeah, so yeah, we'll just start off.
Yeah, I don't know.
You go to a quick lube, this is almost always what they're going to say. You need to flush your brake system. Half the time you don't need to. There's actually a tool right here. There's a tool right here that measures. The only thing that makes brake fluid go bad is water content. There's a tool right here that'll measure the water content of your brake fluid. They won't do this. They're just going to recommend it. So that's the only thing that can tell you. Usually you don't need new brake fluid. So they were going to charge them $99 for that. Probably doesn't need to be done. Cooling system, treat cooling system components with cleaner and conditioner and flush and replace. They're just trying to clean his coolant system. Probably doesn't need it, but we could look at the coolant. But, you know, you should drain and refill your coolant system. You never really have to clean it, especially with cleaners. $99. Valve cover gasket set. Maybe he has a valve cover leak, but that one, okay, valve cover gasket set, valve cover gasket replacement, and engine oil pan gasket. They were going to charge him $750 to replace those gaskets. that's a huge quote. And maybe it has a slight leak, but it's one of those things. If it's a slight leak, what's it worth on a 25-year-old vehicle to replace those things for $1,000? Strut assembly, maybe his struts are bad, but I doubt they did a good test on them to verify. They probably just looked at them. Transmission, filter, and gasket, always going to do that at a quick lube shop. Spark plugs. Did I do spark plugs, or was that on your wife's car?
That was on my wife's car.
Oh, yeah. Probably doesn't need spark plugs. Again, one of those things you'd have to look at, but they probably didn't pull one out and look at it. And then test and inspect windshield washer system for a mechanical or electrical failure. That's funny because I know exactly what's wrong. His windshield washer fluid hoses are dry rotted. So if he pulls the trigger, it's just going to spray out. It's working. They would just need to replace like a foot long section of hose. So that's pretty funny. But those are pretty common things that quick lube shops will get you with. That's kind of their quick lube shop thing. If you go to another mechanic, it's usually a different set of things, but spark plugs and tune up and kind of stuff goes under that. So again, one of those things, he probably doesn't need most of those, but they probably didn't verify very well that he does. And then if you do, maybe you do, but you should take it to somebody that you trust and not somebody who has some sort of authority position and can just kind of push it on you and get you to do it. So that's pretty crazy and definitely not worth paying $2,000 for. So be careful.
So you saved me $2,500 there. That's great. The other thing too is psychology tells us that us as humans, we love commitment and consistency, at least within ourselves. Basically, that means that when we behave a certain way or we have certain beliefs, we like to be consistent in those. And so salesmen and mechanics, they'll use this to their advantage, and maybe you guys have heard this idea before. It's just like getting the customer to say yes. So if they can get us to say yes, 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 then pretty soon they can get us to, say yes to bigger things. So they'll start with something small, get us to say yes to that, and then they'll try to just pile more things onto it, because once we say yes to something small, we're much more likely to say yes to something bigger. And I'm just thinking of other, examples of how this works. When we start something, we want to finish it. And so getting an oil change could lead to so many other unnecessary things. And something that happened to me just the other week when I was getting my oil changed is the mechanic came out and he came to the waiting room where I was, and he said, "Hey, let me show you something on your car." And I was like, okay. Already one, I said yes to going with him to look at something on my car. And then he pointed to something in my car and he's like, "Hey, do you see this right here?" And I look at it and I say yes. And he's like, "Well, do you see how it's, broken or like this?" And I'm just like, "Yes." And then he's like, "Well, you got to do this, and it's going to cost this much." And it's hard because I've already acknowledged the problem. Like, I already told him, like, yeah, I see what you're talking about. And so it's way harder at that point to say, no, I don't want the service that you're talking about, because I'm already wanting to be consistent with what I've done leading up to that point. So it's hard because mechanics can use that against you.
Yeah, perfect example. I think the easiest way to get yourself out of this, and a lot of people are very good at this, I'm not one of those people, is being able to walk into the store and say, all I want is an oil change. Don't touch my filter. Don't touch anything else. If you top off the fluids, great. If you vacuum it out, great. Don't recommend me anything else. Just change my oil. And those are the people who have the best success of not getting ripped off, because they may say, hey, I fixed my car myself. I have a mechanic I trust. My buddy does it. My brother does it. My neighbor does it. Whatever. You don't even need an excuse. But just being able to walk in and say no up front without them even asking, like, don't do anything else. And those people are the best at avoiding getting ripped off. And they're not, I've worked on those people's cars before. They're not the kind of people that are going to say no when I recommend they get brakes done either. They're not, I'm not trying to say they're cheapskates and never fix their vehicle. They're just good at recognizing, those sort of situations and staying out of them. Because they may call me out a few weeks later and be like, hey, can you replace my spark plugs? And I'll be like, hey, I noticed this and this. This one's kind of serious. This one's not so serious. They'll be like, okay, well, let's do both of them. And in a lot of cases, they're not cheapskates, but just be, I guess, willing up front to say no, to put your foot down. And again, I'm not good at that, but those are the people who have the best success in my, from the people I know.
Yeah, and I think this can also lead to that sunk cost fallacy that I think you and I have talked about before,
Yep.
where sometimes we feel like we're already neck deep. They're like, oh, well, you've got to do this, 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 and then they're like, oh, and there's this other thing I can do, and you're like, well, you might as well, because I've already spent hours in this mechanic shop. You've already got my car up on the thingy, I don't know what it's called, and you're already, tearing everything apart. You might as well throw another thing in there, because I feel like I've already, put so much money into this. What's another couple $100?
Yeah, or you could buy like a typical college student car for $2,000, and then you put $1,000 in repairs into it, and then all of a sudden you get a quote that's like $3,000 to get it back running in tip-top shape, and at that point you're like, well, I've already spent, you know, $3,000 on it, plus I pay for gas and insurance. If you step back and look, like, okay, just take that $3,000 and buy a little bit nicer vehicle. Obviously every vehicle has an associated maintenance cost, but it's just that idea of like, okay, I've already spent so much on my vehicle, but beware, that does not increase the value of your vehicle. If you have a $2,000 vehicle and you put $5,000 in repairs into it, at the end of the day, when you go to resell it, it's still only worth $2,000.
Yeah. And the last point, at least for psychological things, is it has to do with fear. And fear is a very powerful tool, and I'm not saying that every mechanic does this, but if they can play with, you know, our fear a little bit, then they're going to have the upper hand on you. That's just because, you know, psychology tells us that we don't like fear in general. It's uncomfortable. We try to avoid it, and so when we start getting into that fearful mindset, them telling all these terrible things to us, that like, oh, your car's going to explode the next time you try to drive it, and you start imagining like yourself down the freeway and your car, you know, completely craps out and you cause an accident or something. Like, there's so many things at play there that could lead you to do something that maybe you don't need to do. And so when you start to feel yourself feeling afraid, and it's because of what the mechanic is saying, that should be a pretty big red flag to you that maybe, you know, you got to maybe reconsider what they're talking about.
Yeah, earlier when we mentioned authority, and I said that was the second biggest one, the biggest one is fear. And this is one that any mechanic can instill in you. Even like those shade tree mechanics, you know, the old guy, not to say anything bad about old guys, just whoever it is, the guy with the cigarette hanging out of his mouth, leaning over your car in his torn up old t-shirt. Oh, look here, you got your muffler bearing going out, your blinker fluid, your flux capacitor back here is going to blow up if you hit 70 miles an hour on the interstate next time. You know, that person that just starts throwing stuff out, you have no idea what they're talking about, and they're saying, yeah, your brake lines are rusty. You never know. Tomorrow your brakes could go out, and you're going to smash into the person in front of you at the red light. You better get these fixed. You know, that kind of person, and a lot of mechanics do this, and not the shade tree kind, but you walk into the shop, and it's always like, oh, your brakes are bad kind of thing, or this is bad, and it's like they try and be real serious about it. They're just instilling that fear, like, oh, man, I've got to get this replaced. I may not even be able to drive it home from here. I don't know how I got it here kind of thing. And you really need to go back to the waiting room or take a walk outside and say, I'll be back in 5 minutes to give you my answer, and call somebody that you trust. Call your dad if you need to. I bet most people's dads have good experience, or your brother or cousin or whoever has a little bit of mechanical abilities, and say, does this sound right to you? And just be very careful in those situations. When you start getting scared, that's usually a big red flag that, hey, they're trying to pressure me into something here.
Yep. And I think that's really a good introduction to a lot of the things that you should know when you do work with mechanics and you're like me and you don't really know much about cars. These tips can hopefully help you so that you can stay out of trouble and stay, you know, safe from people who might be trying to take advantage of you. And I think, you know, being able to call someone, really a good motto would be like, if you drove it there, chances are there's a pretty good likelihood that you'll be able to either drive it home or drive it somewhere else.
Yeah,
right. So
exactly. So okay, so Cameron has this awesome list. I'll put it at the end of the video here, so you can take a screenshot of it or whatever if you're interested in knowing, you know, how to avoid getting ripped off. These are super good points. They're all important. A couple of them are a lot more common than others. But again, don't, you know, you've invested all this money in your vehicle. That doesn't mean it's worth more. You know, step back, think about what's, you know, your best financial option. Just a lot of these things, so look them over if you're interested in, you know, this kind of psychological talk. I know I am. Check out Cameron's YouTube channel, pretty sweet. And yeah, thanks for watching.
And that's a job well done.
Job well done.